Well, so much for the Hail Mary of the anti Nintendo community. Everyone had it in their heads this year that the Switch 2 would be buried by the release of Grand Theft Auto 6. That this thing would come out, that it would single handedly save third party gaming, that it would keep PlayStation and Xbox relevant, that PC gaming would thrive, that the industry would successfully be able to get away with raising prices to $100. Grand Theft Auto 6 was supposed to be the glorious last stand for the gaming establishment, right? This was supposed to be the game that was supposed to drive console sales, that was supposed to keep gaming media relevant, that was supposed to keep YouTubers, in business. This was supposed to be the game that would distract everyone from the reality of Nintendo Switch 2 dominating the market space. Mario Kart World being a bigger success than Grand Theft Auto 6. This was supposed to be the thing, the generation defining game that was going to save us all from Nintendo. This was supposed to be a huge deal. And what happens? Instead of Jesus Christ, we got Godot. So instead of a savior, being sent from God, being sent by God to save gamers from Nintendo domination, we're instead left waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting for something that's never, ever, ever coming out. Because let's be real here, Grand Theft Auto 5 came out in 2013. It was disappointing to begin with. It introduced all these aspects that were hugely detrimental to the franchise. The focus on online play, the shark cards, the terrible story. There's so much about Grand Theft Auto 5 that was just a huge disaster, but the industry didn't care because on the surface things were hunky dory. This game sold over 100 million units. It was this this huge shining example of just how lucrative the PlayStation 360 actually was. This was in a lot of ways the swan song for the for the dark age of gaming, in a way, where people didn't care about the game, they didn't care about the story, they didn't care about the mechanics. All they cared about was that oh, I get to run around and do whatever I want in Grand Theft Auto 5. you know and these people never play other games. They never they don't have a lot of experience with other franchises, their developers. They play Grand Theft Auto 5 because that's the only thing that they're interested in playing. It is just, it's the avatar of video games in essence. It's something that everyone goes to see because everyone else is going to see it. But then, at the end of the day, nobody remembers anything about the game. Nobody talks about it. Nobody really cares. The only reason Grand Theft Auto has been put on a pedestal over the past several decades is because that it is, I would say, the final boss to Nintendo's market dominance, because it's kind of the antithesis of everything Nintendo is about. It's not about having fun. It's not about creating engaging experiences. It's about being as toxic as possible, and then just acting as if that in and of itself makes the game entertaining and fun. Oh, look at all the cops I killed in this hospital. There's no nuance to it. There's no depth in the gameplay. It's just a Black Lives Matter simulator. That's what Grand Theft Auto is. It can't compete with anything Nintendo does, and yet we're consistently supposed to believe this is some industry defining thing because normies play it. And it's really something that we really do need to speak out against more. Grand Theft Auto is not a spectacular video game IP. It's not relevant in any way, shape, or form. It cannot compete with Mario, Zelda, Pokemon, Xenoblade, ARMS. It's just not capable of having the same kind of technical depth and complexity that Nintendo offers with their games. Simply compare the racing mechanics between the races in Grand Theft Auto versus the racing in Mario Kart. Mario Kart has all this like really cool, unique mechanics, like drifting, jumping, using items. And like, what does GTA have? Not only are the races not fun, not only are the tracks not designed, like the vehicle controls in and of themselves are terrible and always have been, you know people like to chalk that up to realism or whatever, but what that really amounts to really is that Rockstar just isn't capable of making fun, engaging video games. Nothing they do, whether it comes from like the 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 combat mechanics, whether it comes to shooting, whether it comes to action, melee combat, like they can't make any of it fun or interesting. There are hundreds of developers that do everything they do but better in their own dedicated niche genres and franchises. Instead of playing tennis in Grand Theft Auto, you can buy a real tennis game. Instead of like, um, doing all these boring missions in Grand Theft Auto, you can literally play anything else and just have a way better, more fulfilling time. Grand Theft Auto is not capable of competing with Nintendo. And these endless delays, this extreme wait we've had to endure, waiting for this game. I think people are going to be shocked at just how bare bones and uninspired Grand Theft Auto 6 actually is. This is going to be a game that launched 12 years after Grand Theft Auto 5 and is going to look and play exactly like it. The humor is going to be toned down. There's not going to be as much content. There's going to be like more and more, microtransactions and a focus on online features. People I think are going to be very, very appalled at what Grand Theft Auto 6 is like at launch. And all the red flags are there and have been for a long time, and yet we're still in this position where people genuinely think that Grand Theft Auto is going to save the Western video game industry. When in reality, I think what's going to end up happening is that PlayStation and Xbox and PC are going to fail. Grand Theft Auto is going to get rolled into the Nintendo hardware space, and then it's going to get steamrolled by all the superior IPs that people could be playing instead. Grand Theft Auto, without the image of being this punk, degenerate, just like edgy video game franchise that it has, without that image, it fundamentally at its core has nothing. And I do think that's going to become more and more apparent as these games continue to get developed and continue to see release, right? Grand Theft Auto 6, I think, is going to be the beginning of the end of this IP, or at least the idea that this franchise is somehow cutting edge and on top of the gaming world, because it's not, it never was, it never will be. Like, Grand Theft Auto is a complete joke, And I'm very curious as to how much it's going to take for normies to start pointing this out and addressing this, because it's going to happen at some point. The House of Cards is going to collapse at some point, but how's it going to happen? Like, how long is it going to take for this game to come out? Like, we've already seen like a couple of delays at this point. Like, this is really something I think people were expecting to see in 2023, and here we are, like, having hard confirmation that it's being delayed for another year. What's the reason for that? Is the game broken? Is it unfinished? Are they scared of Nintendo Switch 2? Like, all of that is like very, very possible, but what it all amounts to really is a declining brand. Like, the company cannot afford these decade-long development cycles. Like, Grand Theft Auto 6 is really something that we should have gotten in like 2018, we really should be talking about like Grand Theft Auto 7 at this point, or honestly, have even already gotten it. You know, like there was no reason for like the development cycle for this game to go on for as long as it did. There was no reason for Grand Theft Auto 5 to be released like dozens of times. You know, there was no reason for Grand Theft Auto 5 to never release on Nintendo consoles. You know, like Grand Theft Auto is not in a position where it can drive Xbox and PlayStation sales by itself. You know, like everyone's gonna get a PlayStation or Xbox for Grand Theft Auto 5, and then everyone's just gonna go back to Switch 2 or even Switch 1. You know, that's like the inevitable future for PlayStation and Xbox, and it's going to be very, very interesting to see Grand Theft Auto fail because when Grand Theft Auto fails, we will know that nothing could possibly stop Nintendo from remaining on top of the gaming industry.